For Leroy Hoard, the true story, Shedeur Sanders' benching isn't about stats or scheme, it's about potential loss to dysfunction. He painted a picture of a young quarterback with the tools, mindset, and pedigree to thrive, trapped in an organization too broken to cultivate him. Sanders' mechanical flaws, fixable with time and reps, have been used as justification for inaction, not development. Meanwhile, veterans like Dillon Gabriel continue to play not because they're better, but because they're safe.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Hoard's frustration was unmistakable. The Browns have a gem they're too disorganized to polish. In his closing thoughts, Hoard made it clear that Cleveland's problem isn't talent, it's culture. The franchise has confused control for competence and fear for strategy. Until the Browns rebuild not just their roster but their philosophy, players like Sanders will keep paying the price for an organization that refuses to learn from its own mistakes. Leroy Hoard didn't mince words. He didn't hedge. He didn't dance around it with vague football cliches or soft criticism. On Locked on Browns, he said exactly what many people have been whispering for weeks. The Cleveland Browns are not just mishandling Shedeur Sanders, they're actively failing him. And as soon as the words left his mouth, the reaction was immediate. Fans were stunned. Analysts picked sides. The internet lit up with 1,000 think pieces and fiery takes. But underneath the noise, one thing was clear: Hoard had struck a nerve. Not just with Browns fans. With the entire conversation around how teams treat young talent when things go sideways. Because this wasn't just about Sanders. It was about what his benching represents. A symptom of deeper dysfunction. A glaring reflection of a franchise more committed to preserving power than building anything real. Sanders didn't come in as a finished product. No one claimed he was ready to take over immediately. But he came in with raw talent, poise, and leadership that stood out. And instead of using this season to develop those tools, the Browns tucked him away behind veterans like Dillon Gabriel, who, as Hoard pointed out, hasn't been consistent enough to justify the decision. And that's where the frustration boils over. Because what are the Browns protecting? A 2-6 record? A broken evaluation process? A front office still clinging to the idea that the Watson trade might eventually pan out? Hoard called it for what it is: an organization acting out of fear, not vision. He wasn't just talking about a young quarterback stuck in QB3 purgatory. He was talking about a culture that defaults to safe options even when those options are clearly failing. A franchise where the illusion of stability outweighs the reality of stagnation. And let's be real, if Dillon Gabriel were lighting it up every week, this wouldn't even be a conversation. But he's not. The Browns aren't winning. The offense is flat. The energy is low. So if you're not going to develop the rookie and you're not getting results from the vet, what are you? That's the question Hoard slammed on the table. And no one in Cleveland seems to have a straight answer. Because they know what's really going on. Sanders' mechanics, his footwork, his timing, those are things that improve with real reps. Not film study. Not scout team duty. Actual game action. The kind that young quarterbacks across the league are getting, even in limited doses, so they can grow. So they can fail, adjust, and come back sharper. But in Cleveland, that kind of growth is off limits. Because the coaching staff is walking on eggshells. Because the front office is still recovering from the fallout of the Watson deal. Because everyone is scared that one more wrong move could trigger a chain reaction they can't control. So they sit Sanders. Not because it's the right football decision, but because it's the safest political one. And Hoard went straight for the jugular. This isn't development. This is dysfunction. He pointed back to the Watson trade, not just as a misstep, but as the moment the Browns gave up flexibility, gave up future draft picks, gave up options, and replaced them with pressure. Pressure to win now. Pressure to justify past decisions. Pressure to avoid any risk that might expose how shaky this foundation really is. And what do you do under that kind of pressure? You don't experiment. You don't develop. You cling to control. Which is exactly what Cleveland is doing. They're trying to survive the optics of the season, rather than confront the reality of it. And here's where it gets even more infuriating. Hoard pointed out that quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson didn't arrive fully formed. They were shaped, molded, coached through real scenarios, trusted, not sheltered, not sidelined. Meanwhile, Sanders, who has the raw materials to be great, is watching from the sideline while the team pretends that he's not ready, is a good enough excuse for inaction. But what Hoard made painfully clear is this: Readiness doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen without opportunity. And if the Browns don't start creating that opportunity, they're not just wasting Sanders, they're wasting time. Because every week that goes by without a development plan, without a progression path, is a week that pushes this franchise further into irrelevance. This isn't about rushing a player. It's about refusing to build a system that allows anyone to grow. That's what Hoard called out. That's why the reaction was so intense. And when he said that Sanders' situation isn't a quarterback issue, but a cultural one, he wasn't exaggerating. The Browns are operating under a mindset where it's more acceptable to lose with a veteran than to risk losing while developing a rookie. They'd rather be mediocre than uncertain. And that's the most dangerous kind of thinking. Because it doesn't just stall progress, it kills it. And what happens when a player like Sanders, someone who's grown up around elite football, who understands media pressure, who brings composure even under scrutiny, gets treated like he's invisible? What message does that send to the locker room? To the league? To the fans? Hoard said it best. This isn't about one player being benched. This is about a franchise that has no roadmap. They're not rebuilding because they won't commit to the youth movement. They're not contending because their record and performance say otherwise. And they're not preparing for the future, because the future is sitting idle while a shaky present eats up all the attention. And worst of all, they're acting like this is normal. Like this is fine. It's not. This is how you waste years. This is how you waste talent. This is how you get stuck in the cycle Cleveland knows too well. Cycling through quarterbacks, chewing through coaching staffs, and blaming execution, when the real problem is the blueprint. Or the lack of one. Sanders doesn't need to be the savior. He just needs to be part of a system that believes in his growth. And if that's not happening, then it's not a quarterback problem, it's a leadership one. So the next time someone asks why Leroy Hoard went so hard, why he didn't hold back, just point them here. Because this wasn't about hype. It was about accountability. And unless the Browns start facing that, Shedeur Sanders is just the beginning of a much bigger failure. Drop your thoughts below. Is Hoard right, or is this just another overreaction to a rookie sitting? Should Cleveland change course before the season slips even further, or is the risk too high to try anything new? Like this video if you're tired of seeing promising talent rot behind bad strategy. Share it with anyone who still thinks this is all part of the process. And hit subscribe, because this isn't just a story. It's a warning. And Cleveland better start listening before there's nothing left to say. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that sets in when you watch the same story play out over and over, season after season, with only the names on the jerseys changing. That's what Leroy Hoard was tapping into when he ripped into the Cleveland Browns' handling of Shedeur Sanders. It wasn't just criticism. It was catharsis. A long overdue outburst from someone who's seen this team drag talented players through the same rinse-and-repeat cycle of mismanagement, dysfunction, and empty promises. He wasn't attacking Sanders. He was defending him, from a system that's been broken for years and has no real plan to fix itself. Because let's stop pretending this is about development. It's not. If it were, Sanders wouldn't be a ghost in the quarterback room. He wouldn't be running scout team drills while the Browns roll out Dillon Gabriel week after week, pretending that's somehow helping anyone. Hoard called it like it is. Shedeur isn't being developed, he's being stored. Like an unopened gift the franchise isn't quite ready to admit they don't know what to do with. And that's the tragedy here. Not that Sanders is sitting. But that there's no evidence, none, that he's even being prepared. No package plays. No situational snaps. No rumblings of growth or momentum. Just silence. And in that silence, Hoard saw what a lot of fans have been too exhausted to say out loud. The Browns aren't building. They're treading water. Protecting optics. Preserving jobs. And in the process, they're wasting one of the few bright spots on a team that desperately needs something to believe in. When Hoard brought up Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, it wasn't just to make comparisons. It was to highlight the stark difference between organizations that commit to a quarterback's development and those that pretend to. Mahomes didn't become Mahomes just by sitting behind Alex Smith. He sat with intention. He was mentored, coached, challenged, and groomed for the role. Same with Jackson, who was thrown into the fire, flaws and all, and trusted to rise through the mistakes. What's happening with Sanders is the opposite. He's not in a pressure cooker. He's in a storage closet. And why? Hoard said it. The Browns don't trust their system enough to let it do its job. They don't believe their coaching staff can bring Sanders along without backlash, without chaos, without exposing the fragile scaffolding holding the season together. So instead they stick with the safe option. Gabriel. The veteran. The guy who makes fewer headlines. Even if he also makes fewer plays. It's not just cowardly. It's counterproductive. Because if the Browns are really 2-6, and if they're really committed to some kind of future, then when exactly do they plan to start investing in it? Week 12? Next season? When another regime takes over and decides to start fresh, again. This is how talent gets lost. Not because the player isn't good enough, but because the environment around him is too unstable, too insecure, or too incompetent to actually do the work of development. And Hoard made it clear, this isn't a Sanders issue. It's an organizational issue. A franchise-wide failure to understand that development isn't about waiting. It's about doing. It's active. It's messy. It takes risk and patience and confidence in your ability to coach through adversity. But the Browns don't coach through adversity. They duck under it. Every decision they've made this season reflects a team that's terrified to be wrong. Hoard's words pointed to a group that's more interested in self-preservation than player progression. They're not testing their talent. They're hiding it behind the narrative that he's not ready, hoping fans won't question the depth chart too hard. But the truth is obvious now. You don't keep a young quarterback benched this long, without any clear progression plan, unless you're more concerned with protecting the coaching staff than preparing the player. It all circles back to the Watson trade. That deal wasn't just controversial, it was reckless. The Browns gave up future flexibility, cap space, and public goodwill in one swoop. And since then, every move they've made has been tethered to that moment. They can't afford another failure. So now, instead of building with long-term vision, they're managing the fallout. And Sanders is the collateral. Even Hoard, as frustrated as he was, still emphasized that Sanders has the potential, the poise, the lineage. But those things don't matter if you bury a player under indecision and pretend it's part of the process. That's not how quarterbacks become great. That's how they become forgotten. Let's say the Browns wait until next season to see what they have. What happens when Sanders finally takes the field, still raw, still untested, still lacking the real reps he could have gotten now, when the stakes were already low? Then what? You spend another year evaluating? Another season down the drain? That's how you lose the locker room. That's how you lose fan trust. That's how you build a legacy of what-ifs. And Cleveland has had enough of those. It's not about pushing Sanders into the spotlight before he's ready. It's about putting him on the path, testing him, challenging him, coaching him like a real part of the plan, not a marketing bullet point buried behind the safety net of a veteran placeholder. Because here's the harsh truth Hoard laid bare. The Browns don't know what they're doing. Not with Sanders. Not with the season. Not with the future. And until someone in that building owns up to it, until they decide to stop managing PR and start managing personnel, nothing's going to change. You don't stumble into sustainable success in the NFL. You build it. And that takes leadership. It takes vision. It takes decisions that might make you look foolish in the short term but set you up for the long term. The Browns haven't made one of those in a long time. And Shedeur Sanders is running out of time to wait for them to figure it out. You'd think a team that's been rebuilding for the better part of 2 decades would recognize when they're repeating old, but here we are, again. And that's what made Leroy Hoard's on-air explosion so raw, so necessary. Because he didn't just throw shade. He held up a mirror. And what he reflected back at the Cleveland Browns was years of failed strategy disguised as caution. Years of papering over structural flaws with, maybe next year, optimism. And now, at the center of it all, a quarterback with real potential, getting absolutely nothing out of this mess. Let's not get it twisted. Shedeur Sanders was never supposed to be the day one starter. That's fine. That's reasonable. But what's not fine, what Hoard called out with laser-sharp clarity, is the complete lack of a plan beyond he's our QB3 for now. For now. That phrase becomes a black hole in Cleveland. It's where young talent goes to wait. And wait. And wait. Until eventually, fans forget they were ever part of the future to begin with. It's déjà vu for Browns fans who've seen this play out with other quarterbacks, other draft picks, other development projects, who ended up getting swallowed by the franchise's own indecision. And Hoard wasn't subtle. He tore through the narrative like a linebacker through a blown-up screen pass. Because this isn't about one guy. It's about an entire culture of fear. Fear of failure. Fear of accountability. Fear of rocking the boat, even when the boat is already sinking. The Browns' quarterback room isn't run like a meritocracy. It's run like a bunker. Dillon Gabriel is in the lineup not because he's playing lights-out football, but because he represents safe. He's familiar. Predictable. Manageable. The coaching staff knows what they're getting. Even if what they're getting is, frankly, not enough. And that's the issue. Cleveland has convinced itself that playing it safe is smart. That benching Sanders is part of some master timeline. That keeping him out of the spotlight now will pay off later. But there's no later without. Game reps aren't just valuable. They're irreplaceable. That's what Hoard was screaming beneath the surface. Without live experience, quarterbacks don't just stagnate, they regress. Timing, rhythm, awareness, it doesn't magically sharpen on the practice field. It gets built in real moments, in real games, against real pressure. Meanwhile, Sanders is watching from the sideline, rehearsing instead of performing, sitting instead of growing. That's not patience, that's paralysis. And Hoard knew it. He called out how the organization continues to prioritize optics over outcomes. They traded away a chunk of their future for Deshaun Watson, a move that still has the franchise shackled, and now they're scrambling to save face. Every decision, including who starts under center, gets filtered through that desperation. They can't afford another mistake, so they make no moves at all. And that is how you waste a roster. That's how you kill momentum before it even starts. When Hoard said the Browns aren't making decisions based on player readiness, he wasn't speculating. He was speaking from the pattern. Sanders is QB3 not because of what he can't do, but because of what the organization refuses to let him do. They've boxed themselves in. And instead of getting creative, instead of adapting, they're retreating further into this illusion that staying the course is leadership. Spoiler, it's not. It's cowardice dressed up as conservatism. It's stagnation spun as strategy. And the fans see it. That's why Hoard's comments blew up the way they did. Because people are tired. Tired of the excuses. Tired of watching other franchises take bold swings while Cleveland runs in place. Tired of watching young talent fade while the organization hides behind vague statements about timelines and evaluations. At some point, a team has to stop explaining and start executing. And right now, Cleveland's not executing anything. Except maybe another season lost. They're not winning. They're not developing. And they're not being honest about either. So what happens next? DW, do they keep riding Gabriel until the record collapses completely? Do they wait for a press conference where someone finally admits the plan was a myth all along? Or do they take the risk that Hoard, and frankly anyone paying attention, is begging them to take? Play Shedeur. Let him learn. Let him struggle. Let him grow. He doesn't need to save the team. He just needs to be allowed to evolve. Because every week he doesn't play is a week the Browns are choosing organizational comfort over actual progress. They're choosing to avoid headlines rather than make them. They're choosing to look in control rather than be bold enough to take it. And that's how you end up as a cautionary tale. Leroy Hoard sounded the alarm. Not out of spite. Not out of bitterness. But because he cares enough to call out the reality that too many in the organization won't face. And the truth is this, the Browns are already losing. So what exactly do they have left to lose? And here's where it all just stops making sense. The Browns aren't contenders. They aren't rebuilding. And they sure aren't developing. They're floating, stuck in football limbo, pretending they're protecting their rookie quarterback when really they're just protecting themselves. That's the hard truth Leroy Hoard threw straight into the spotlight. Because let's be honest, what's the point of keeping Shedeur Sanders at QB3 when Dillon Gabriel is under center playing like a human shrug? What message does that send to the locker room? That mediocrity is rewarded because it's safer than potential? Hoard wasn't trying to destroy Shedeur's hype. He was defending it. He was calling out the exact system that's smothering that potential before it even gets a chance to breathe. And the worst part? It's not even new. This is classic Browns. Invest in talent, mishandle it, then wonder why things never pan out. The story keeps writing itself. Except this time the stakes are different. This time the whole league is watching. And Hoard made sure no one could look away. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said Sanders is being denied the one thing every young quarterback needs: opportunity. Not meaningless reps in a closed practice, not playbook study and clipboard duty, real-time decision-making under real pressure. That's how quarterbacks develop. That's how you find out what they're made of. Instead, Cleveland's giving those chances to veterans who've already hit their ceiling. And don't get it twisted. This isn't about rushing Sanders or throwing him into a no-win situation. It's about creating a path forward. Because right now the Browns don't have one. They're so afraid of getting it wrong they're not doing anything. That's organizational paralysis. And it's deadly in the NFL. Hoard pulled no punches when he called out the Deshaun Watson trade. Not because Watson's a bad player, but because the price Cleveland paid for him erased their flexibility. They burned through first-round picks like matchsticks. And what do they have to show for it? a quarterback carousel, a depleted roster, and a front office still pretending the plan hasn't gone off the rails. The ripple effect is everywhere. It's in the inconsistency on the field. It's in the locker room morale. And it's in the way players like Shedeur are treated, not as long-term investments, but as background extras in the franchise's ongoing PR nightmare. And Hoard wasn't subtle. This is how a team loses its soul. When you start making every decision to preserve face instead of build a future, you start shrinking your possibilities. You start playing not to lose instead of playing to win. That mindset infects everything. Coaching, player development, game day decisions. It becomes and for the Browns, that culture is looking a lot like fear. Fear of media backlash. Fear of admitting past mistakes. Fear of trying something new, because new might mean uncertainty, and this organization is addicted to control. But control doesn't win games. Vision does. Courage does. And right now, Cleveland has neither. They have a quarterback with upside and leadership and pedigree, someone who's shown flashes of brilliance even in limited reps. And instead of nurturing that, they've buried it under layers of not yet and maybe next year. It's a slow suffocation disguised as strategy. And Hoard wasn't going to let them get away with it. He put it all on the table. The flawed evaluation process. The over-reliance on shaky veterans. The disconnect between what this team says it wants and what it actually does. It's all part of a broader dysfunction, a top-down failure that affects everyone on the depth chart. The fans? They've seen it. They're exhausted. They're not buying the spin anymore. And honestly, neither is the locker room. Because players know when talent is being wasted. They see the potential. They see the reps being handed to someone who's just holding the spot. And at a certain point, it chips away at belief, not just in the quarterback room but across the roster. What's the incentive to grind, to improve, to earn your shot, if the team's just going to default to the safest choice anyway? That's the kind of message that kills momentum before it even starts. And the Browns can't afford that right now. They've already lost years to mismanagement. They've already burned through regimes, quarterbacks, coordinators. What they haven't done is build anything sustainable. And now, with a young quarterback who actually could be part of a long-term answer, they're squandering it all, again. Leroy Hoard just said what needed to be said. You don't develop a quarterback by hiding him. You don't fix a culture by maintaining the illusion of control. And you definitely don't win in this league by playing scared. You win by having a vision. By owning your mistakes. By committing to growth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because comfort doesn't build contenders. It builds excuses. So what now? Do the Browns keep doubling down on the status quo? Do they keep Sanders in the shadows, pretending that someday maybe they'll figure out the perfect moment to unleash him? Or do they admit it's time to act? Not because the fans are angry. Not because the media's asking questions. But because this is how you start building something real. You let the kid play. You give him the tools. You ride the waves. You teach, you adjust, and you grow. Because this limbo? This endless wait for everything to be perfect before you try anything at all? That's a losing strategy. That's how you waste talent. That's how you waste years. And the Browns have wasted enough. So let's hear from you, because at this point it's not just a team issue. It's a community one. Should Shedeur get the nod, or has Cleveland already made up its mind? Are you buying what the coaching staff is selling? Or are you, like Hoard, calling BS on the whole thing? Drop a comment below. Light it up if you're tired of the same song on repeat. Share this with a fan who's still hanging on to just wait as a philosophy. And subscribe. We're not done talking about Cleveland's quarterback mess, not by a long shot.